Hi there, listeners. Claire is taking a break this week, so we're going to do things a bit differently today. I've invited my brother, Kim, to come on the show and talk about the 1986 fantasy movie Crossroads, which focuses on blues musicians who sell their soul to Satan in exchange for fame, and which should definitely not be confused with the 2002 film of the same name starring Britney Spears. They're completely disconnected, and other than the title, have nothing in common. Now, if you've listened to any of the other episodes I've recorded with Claire, then you'll know we don't normally bother with a detailed plot summary. We just assume people are familiar with the basic concepts of the movie and launch straight into the discussion. But in this case, I'll make an exception, because you see, Crossroads is quite an obscure little movie. At least here in my native Australia it is. So I'm going to fly solo for a bit, give you a sort of mini review of the film. Then Kim's going to come on and we'll discuss the picture in more depth. Crossroads draws its inspiration from many of the urban legends surrounding real-life blues guitarist Robert Johnson. It's said that Johnson went to a place called Fulton's Point in Mississippi, met with the devil at a crossroads, and sold his soul for fame. The devil blessed his guitar, and Robert became one of the most renowned and influential blues musicians of all time, despite only recording 29 songs before dying under mysterious circumstances at age 27. Well, I say 29 songs. There's another urban legend which says Johnson actually came up with 30, and the lost song is somewhere out there waiting to be found. In the film, one of Johnson's buddies, a harmonica player named Willie Brown, also goes to Fulton's Point in the 1930s, meets with the devil at the crossroads and sells his soul, hoping to achieve the same kind of legendary status as Robert did in the process. But Willie's fame is fleeting, and by the time the 1980s roll on, he's broke, abandoned by his family, and languishing in a dismal nursing home. The main plot of the movie kicks in 1985. We're introduced to Eugene Martone, played by Ralph Macchio of the Karate Kid fame, who is a 17-year-old classical guitar prodigy from a rich family in Long Island, studying music at New York's prestigious Juilliard School. He's also working part-time at the nursing home as a cleaner. And though Eugene's musical training has focused on classical technique, his real passion is blues music, and he hero worships Robert Johnson. So when Gene finds out that the aged Willie Brown, played by Joe Seneca, is resident at the nursing home, he begs the old bluesman to share some musical wisdom with him. Now, Willie thinks that Eugene is a dumbass hipster trying to culturally appropriate black music, but at the same time, Willie is desperate to get out of the nursing home and return to the crossroads in Mississippi. Willie wants to confront Satan because he feels shortchanged on the deal they made, and now he wants his soul back. Willie promises that in return for help in busting out of the nursing home, he'll teach Eugene the legendary lost song of Robert Johnson that's never been recorded before, and generally mentor him so that he can be a more credible blues musician. Eugene and Willie hitchhike from New York to Mississippi, playing in bars, sleeping in barns, falling foul of corrupt cops, and generally getting some nitty-gritty experience of US racial and class divisions in the process. Along the way, they help out Frances, played by Jamie Gertz, a teenage runaway fleeing a broken home and an abusive stepfather. Eugene gets burned by first love with Frances and learns that in order to play the blues, you have to live them first, as they say. Eventually, Eugene and Willie reach the crossroads and have a little chat with Satan. The devil agrees to give Willie his soul back if Eugene can win a guitar playing contest against Satan's champion guitarist, Steve Vai. And let's just say a guitar duel for the ages ensues. Yeah, I love this movie. The way that John Fusco's screenplay seamlessly blends these mythical Americana elements with sharp social commentary on the class and racial divisions that existed in the US at the time, some of which sadly still haven't gone away. It's just a masterclass in great writing. The movie offers some nuanced takes on the debate over cultural homage versus cultural appropriation, and the importance of striking a balance between technical proficiency and emotional depth in artistic expression. Much of the dialogue is bitingly witty, and it's delivered by a solid cast. Ralph Macchio, to my mind, has just the right mix of boyish vulnerability and brash cockiness in the role of Eugene. Joe Seneca's line in crusty, deadpan snark is just priceless. The two make a great double act. Throw in Jamie Gertz, who I've usually seen play damsels in distress in various movies, but she's damn feisty here. I mean, it ensures that even though this is a very talky movie, it never seems to be lacking energy. And then there's Steve Vai, and what can I say? If you're a fan of his brand of virtuoso axe-wielding, you owe it to yourself to see this movie just for his performance in the climactic guitar duel. I'd say the soundtrack to this is just fantastic. But here's the thing, I'm not a guitarist myself. Fortunately, I know someone who is, my dear brother Kim, who is also somewhat more knowledgeable of the blues genre than I am. So I figured it'd be great to have him on the show to talk about this hidden gem of a film. He even recorded a blues guitar variation on our theme music specifically for this episode. So without any further ado, take it away, Kim. So yeah, Kim, thank you for that blues guitar rendition of our theme music.
Yeah, thank you. It's been fun.
Well, in some of the previous episodes that I did with Claire, I mentioned all these urban legends, and I'm a sucker for those kind of things. I think it's like the modern equivalent of tales told around the campfire, you know, and I just think that the urban legends out there surrounding blues musician Robert Johnson are just awesome.
Well, there's certainly quite a few, I guess. Most notably, yes, that he sold his soul to the devil for fame and fortune and all that jazz.
But I don't know, my favorite is that like he was a self-taught guitarist. And I heard that he, you know, practiced in a graveyard and, you know, like the ghost would give him encouragement, like, oh, you can do it, Robert. And, you know, despite all that spectral encouragement, a lot of his friends and family still thought he was a mediocre musician until, like, he disappeared for 1.5 years and didn't, you know, contact his friends or family at all during that time. No one knew where he was. Some people thought he was dead. And, like, even today, like, historians can't pinpoint exactly where he was and how he was supporting himself. And supposedly at that time was when he went to a crossroads in Mississippi and sold his soul to the devil, and the devil blessed his guitar, and then he came back and he was suddenly this like awesome, prodigiously awesome musician.
Yes. I mean, truth be told, he probably went away and practiced, but that's more prosaic.
Yeah, it's a less exciting theory.
Yeah, and also a lot of blues musicians, funnily enough, did used to practice in graveyards because it was...
Really?
Yes, because it was a very convenient place to practice. No one would hear you because no one sort of hung out there. And you could just play and play and play all day, all night, whatever. And it was so very sort of convenient if you didn't have like a bedroom to practice in, like a lot of teenagers do these days, I guess.
And then there's like all these legends about how he died, like that he was, you know, shot. Some say he was stabbed. Some say that he was poisoned and then he was stabbed just to make sure that he was dead.
Rasputin style.
And or just that the devil came to, you know, drag him off to hell early because, I don't know, he wasn't satisfied with what he was doing with his gifts. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, one thing's for sure, I mean, he died very young, and before his time, I think, in terms of his, I guess, music career, put it that way.
Well, what I've heard is that he was one of the 27 Club. When he died in, what was
one of the first.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think the other members of the club are like, was it Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Amy Winehouse, Kurt Cobain. They all died when they were 27.
Yeah. I don't know what to say.
No, that's all right.
Yeah, true.
Yes. Was supposedly a cursed age or something. That's another urban legend. But that was like in the 1930s he died?
Yeah, 1938 or 9, I think it was, from memory. He was scheduled to perform at a blues showcase in Chicago, but obviously never made it. And I think Leadbelly ended up doing that instead, and that sort of led to a greater resurgence in his music throughout the sort of 30s and 40s.
And during his lifetime, Robert Johnson he didn't record a lot of music. Like, his entire body of work just fits on a couple of CDs, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's 29 songs, and they're recorded over 2 sessions, a few months apart, I believe. And there's a few sort of like alternate takes of a few of the songs. But yeah, 29 original pieces altogether, and probably about, I think, something like 35 or so recordings, I think.
Which I guess brings us to the 1985 film Crossroads, which is about a Robert Johnson fanboy who's on a quest to find the like long lost, missing, legendary 30th song of Robert Johnson.
Yeah.
But before we get to the film, though, I just like to ask you, because you're a guitarist, you're a musician, what you think is the appeal of Robert Johnson's music beyond like this mystique that surrounds him as a person?
Well, I guess there's a couple of things. Firstly, a lot of the blues musicians, his contemporaries at the time, played live a lot, obviously, but weren't necessarily prepared to be in the studio and record to what the recording medium was back then, which is, you know, little wax discs that went for about 2.5, 3 minutes. So their songs weren't as well structured, whereas Robert Johnson's, I guess, enduring appeal is he wrote these songs and he recorded them in such a way that they were arranged for that time. So they all go for like 2.5, 3 minutes, and they have a beginning, middle, and end in that time. Bang, done. So he was one of the first, I guess, bluesmen to have music that was built for recording, essentially. And he sort of popularized, actually, there's a guitar here. A riff you hear all the time in blues music. And that's what you hear in so many blues songs all the time. And you hear it in pretty much every one of Robert Johnson's songs. So a very influential guitarist for the blues.
I know that he also influenced a lot of like rock musicians as well. I mean, Keith Richards and Eric Clapton are big-time fanboys of Robert Johnson. I mean, to the point that like Eric Clapton recorded a whole album, Me and Mr. Johnson, which was just Robert Johnson songs.
And funnily enough, those were the songs he hadn't recorded on other albums. He's pretty much done all of Robert Johnson's songs at one point or another.
Wow.
So, I mean, one of the earliest recordings of Eric Clapton is on the John Mayall's Blues Breakers album, where he's recording Ramblin' on My Mind, for example, which is a Robert Johnson song.
Well, I guess like the four big Robert Johnson songs that became standards in years to come and have been covered by so many people, like it's impossible to count, would be Rambling on My Mind and Hellhound on My Trail and Sweet Home Chicago and Crossroad Blues.
Yeah, I mean, you can't sort of play blues in Chicago, I think, without doing it. I think probably it's against the law or something. I don't know. But yeah, it's certainly one of his biggest hits for other people.
Well, that's the thing. I was first introduced to Robert Johnson's music when, like, our parents had a cassette tape of the soundtrack to Crossroads by Ry Cooder, and you know it opens with a very peculiar cover of Crossroad Blues, which actually isn't featured in the film, I don't think. I mean, it's a positively like upbeat, jubilant.
Oh yeah, it's a real rocking version. Yeah, well worth listening to for all your listeners. Yeah.
Well, yeah, if you're a Ry Cooder fan or a Robert Johnson fan, like the soundtrack album, like it actually features a lot of like extended arrangements of songs that are heard only fleetingly in the film, as well as like some songs that are just seem to be inspired by the film. Anyone listening to this who's a fan of the actress Amy Madigan, known for like things like Field of Dreams, which we did on another episode of the podcast, or the TV show Carnivale. She's actually a singer on the Crossroads soundtrack. She does a cover of He Made a Man Out of Me. But yeah, I first introduced through, I guess, covers by other artists like Clapton and the Blues Brothers doing Sweet Home Chicago. I probably voted before the original.
Yes.
And it was only much later that I sort of dived deeply into Robert Johnson's music. And a lot of it was probably spurned by my fandom of this movie, Crossroads.
Oh, yeah.
And like being someone who's not a musician, I guess the thing that, you know, resonated with me most strongly when I like listened closely to Robert Johnson's music was his way with words, particularly the way he talked about the ladies.
Yeah. Well, blues is well known, I guess, for its euphemisms, shall we say?
Oh, yes. And like Robert Johnson would describe women as riders. He described sex as barrel housing. I just want to read. I wrote some of these down. I just want to read out some of the lyrics. This is from a Traveling Riverside Blues. I got women's in Vicksburg, clean on into Tennessee, but my Friars Point rider now hops all over me. Yeah. I ain't gonna state no color, but her front teeth is crowned with gold. She's got a mortgage on my body, Lord, a lien on my soul. Lord, I'm going down to Rosedale, rider by my side, where we can still barrel house babe on the riverside.
Hey.
Oh, this is the bit I love. You can squeeze my lemon till the juice run down my leg.
One of the all-time classics. Yeah, it's a real ladies' man, wasn't he? I mean, yeah, the other classics, I guess, is I Believe I'll Dust My Broom, and I think it's got a lot to do with sweeping the house.
Well, this is the thing. The movie Crossroads, as I said, is about a Robert Johnson fanboy. The character of Eugene that Ralph Macchio plays is this classical guitar prodigy from the age of 7 who's, you know, enrolled in Juilliard's prestigious like music school, and like his training is in classical music, but his real passion is for the blues, and he sort of hero worships Robert Johnson to the point that when he discovers that, you know, this blues musician Willie Brown, who used to play with Robert Johnson, is resident at a local nursing home, he basically stalks the guy and gets a job as a cleaner in the nursing home just so that he can hang out with him and
ask him questions and all that stuff.
Yeah, ask him questions about the glory days. In an odd way, like, I could relate to this sort of fanboyishness. Maybe not the stalking part of it, but just because here we are, these sort of, you know, white middle-class Australians who are fascinated by this, you know, this culture, this foreign blues culture.
Yeah, well, I mean, speaking for myself, I mean, I guess I idolized growing up people like, Muddy Waters, John Lee Hooker, people like that, and had been a massive influence on the kind of music I make and the kind of things I write, you know. And yeah, I had absolutely nothing to do with the Mississippi Delta or anywhere else, did I? So, yeah.
Well, what was the appeal for you, really?
I don't know. I guess it's a sort of a visceral feeling I get from hearing that kind of music, and it's one of those things that's a bit hard to describe. I guess it's like, why do you like what you like? I guess, but yeah, it's always been my sort of touchstone musically. I think is the blues. So
I guess there's just this raw, unfiltered intensity to the emotion, and this rough and ready energy that comes through with the playing. Partly because it's structured so simply, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and I guess, simple structures, I guess, if you want to get sort of technical with music, give you a lot of room, like a bit of an empty palette to sort of play with, I guess, then, or an empty canvas to paint on, I suppose. You can take it in a lot of different directions, and it's still essentially a blues,
And the character of Gene in this movie, he has a whole lot of technical expertise as a guitarist.
Got the chops. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, indeed. But this old guy, says that, in order to, be a real blues man, you have to, what is it? In order to play the blues, you have to live them first.
That's right. You got to pay your dues. You got to earn your stripes. All that kind of, all the cliches.
Well, yeah. Basically, he says, there's more to being a great musician than just, being able to make all the right moves on a technical level. You have to have a emotional connection to the music, a spiritual connection to the music.
Yeah.
And that's part of why he says to him, when he makes a deal with this kid, bust me out of this nursing home and help me, get back to Mississippi where I can settle my accounts. And I'll teach you this long lost, legendary 30th song of Robert Johnson that you've been, trying to find. And he does. And basically they hitchhike from New York to Mississippi. And along the way, he sort of, I don't know, gives him all these life lessons, which involves a lot of trolling behavior as well. But
yeah, the original odd couple. Yeah, I do love all the sort of I guess, I don't know what you call it, good-natured bickering, I guess, that is most of the film, really, between the two of them. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but what do you think of this philosophy, though, that you have to have a certain level of emotional mileage to really play this music well?
Well, I think you need a certain level of emotional expression, for sure. Whether or not, you need to, I don't know, have lived the blues, whatever that means. I mean, most blues songs are about, breakups or something. So, I guess, if you've been broken up with, then I guess you've lived the blues, to some extent. But I guess that goes into broader questions of, what is, a certain culture's music. Is it cultural appropriation for me as an Australian to go and play a Robert Johnson song at some gig or whatever? Who's to say? Not me, anyway.
Well, it's funny you mention cultural appropriation.
Well, it does come up in the film. I think he says at some point, doesn't he? You're just another white guy ripping off our music.
Well, yeah, and they bring up the whole fact that people like Keith Richards and Eric Clapton, became famous, at least to start with, covering, songs by black musicians or emulating their style.
Yeah.
But also, it's actually presented in a very nuanced way in this film, and you see people speaking from various different sides of the argument, even at the start of the movie when Gene is talking to his professor at Juilliard, who's saying you should focus on classical, play to your strengths, and says to him basically that, simple music like this, blues music, it's not just a form, a technique that you can master. It's cultural, it's traditional.
Yeah.
And to really do justice to it, you have to be born into it. And there's an air of sort of, I don't know, elitist academic snobbery to some of what he says, but he actually says it in quite a polite way.
And I guess he's also essentially agreeing with what Willie Brown's telling you, Gene, through most of the film in that sense, isn't he? You're not really from here.
Well, he makes all these jokes at the expense of the fact that Gene is born in Long Island, which is this wealthy suburb of New York, I think, wealthy area of New York, and that his parents are rich, and he's going to this fancy school, and
well, they say the voice of the Golden Ghetto.
And sometimes mockingly calls him Lightning Boy, the Long Island blues man. That was something else that Willie Brown says over the course of the film. The blues ain't nothing but a good man feeling bad thinking about the woman he once was with.
Yeah, so in that sense, if you want to paint it in very broad strokes, we've all been there, man. It's we can all sing the blues in that sense, I suppose. But I mean, yeah, I guess it's all that whole question of authenticity that, I mean, you hear a lot of in the last 20 years, I guess, to do with music, to do with art, to do with all kinds of things.
Well, yeah, and I mentioned that, Ralph Macchio is in this. He was in this movie coming straight off the success of The Karate Kid, and this movie came out the same year as The Karate Kid Part 2.
Oh, right.
So between, like, The Karate Kid trilogy and this film, like, I guess Macchio was, like, the poster boy for cultural appropriation in the 80s.
Yeah.
But seriously, the question of cultural appropriation, I usually think of, like, I don't know, cross-pollination, and as far as, like, sharing musical traditions is a good thing.
Yeah.
I think that...
Well, I mean, we're in Adelaide. I mean, there's a whole festival kind of devoted to this called Worm Adelaide that happens every year here in the city. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, that was started by Peter Gabriel, another, white guy who's dabbled in all, like, world music or, traditions that are far apart from the world he grew up in. But I guess that's the thing. I think if you're honest about where you're coming from and you play the music with respect and if you sort of work with people who, are from that background and you don't pretend that you're part of that heritage, you just say, this is my interpretation, then it's okay.
Yeah, like, I think that's probably the biggest part of it. Yeah, it's to approach the material with the respect it deserves. I think anyone can do that if the heart's in the right place.
And, like, Crossroads is basically this road movie. Because, like I said, they're hitchhiking from New York to Mississippi. And along the way, I don't know, they deal with a lot of, I guess, racial tension. Not just racial tension, class tension, generational tension. Yeah. Because you've got this 17-year-old man traveling with an 80-year-old man. And and he's bringing all this baggage from, what he knew of Mississippi back in, like, the 30s or whatever. And, seeing how the political climate has changed in some ways, but not in others.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a bit in the film where they get, they sleep in a barn because they've got nowhere else to stay. And then they're arrested by this sheriff and his corrupt deputies. And the deputies steal all their money and then drive them out of town without formally charging them. Yeah. And the sheriff and his deputies happen to be black. And Willie Brown gets this memorable line where he looks these corrupt cops in the eye and says, like, they tell me that, things have changed around here, and I guess they have, but maybe not.
Yeah, it's interesting.
There's another sequence that illustrates how, even though racial prejudice isn't enshrined in law anymore, a lot of it can still persist through custom, tradition,
culture, I guess.
Well, they go to this town that isn't, like, formally segregated by law, but it still has, like, distinct neighborhoods and, like, the bars in the town. There's one distinctly black bar and there's the white bar. Yeah. And so, it seems to be, like, segregated by tradition, if not by law. And there's still this sort of, even though people aren't, physically coming to blows over it, there's still this tension. There's still this divide in the community. I mean, that's the thing. I wondered about including this piece in the podcast because, for the most part, this is a very laid-back, realistic road movie. And up until the last 20 minutes of the film, there's a level of plausible deniability to the fantasy elements. Like, even like Willie even when Willie has these flashbacks to going to the Crossroads and selling his soul, he's not dealing with the devil directly. He meets with this man who claims to be, like, the devil's representative on Earth, his agent, if you will. Yeah. And he's represented by just this guy in a fancy suit who drives a flash car. And
he's not, like, appearing in a puff of smoke or in fire and brimstone. It's one of those sort of, like, camera tricks where it's like, you look away, oh, there he is, kind of thing. Like, that's the level of the magic involved.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and for the most part, on their journey to the Crossroads, like, the obstacles that Gene and Willie face are quite realistic.
It's like getting lifts and, like, where to stay for the night and this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and they come across this teen runaway named Frances who's fleeing a broken home and a sexually abusive stepfather, and, like, her problems are quite realistic. The puppy love that she develops with Eugene is quite realistic, and the way she dumps him because she realizes they just have different goals in life. That's quite realistic.
Yeah.
So all of this is quite, and like she says to him, like, have you considered, Gene, that maybe this guy Willie is not this is not this legendary blues musician on a first name basis with Satan? Maybe he's just some con man stringing you along. And up to a point, you'd think, well, maybe
he is.
Maybe she's figured that out.
Yeah.
But then comes the last 20 minutes of the movie where they go to the Crossroads and they meet with the devil's representative, and he hasn't aged a day since the 1930s.
Yep.
Even though he's driving the latest model sports car.
Yeah.
And then Satan shows up and he magically teleports Gene and Willie to this club.
Yeah.
Where he says to Willie, like, you can have your soul back, provided that your protege here can win a guitar playing contest against my favorite guitarist, Steve Vai.
Yeah. It's interesting. I wonder where all these sort of guitar duels with the devil, or like things like, the devil went down to Georgia, where all that sort of came from originally. There's probably like some PhD in there somewhere about like, why is it that you can sort of best the devil in a musical contest and that's like the way out?
I have no idea. I do know that it's even older than blues music because there was this classical violinist, Niccolo Paganini.
Well, he was the first sort of like sell the soul to the devil sort of urban legend, wasn't he?
Well, yeah. Well, people say that Paganini sold his soul to the devil because nothing else could explain how good he was at the violin. And at the end of the movie, when Eugene, fights this guitar duel with Steve Vai, like he wins the duel by, basically incorporating everything he knows about rock, blues, and classical techniques.
Yeah, he busts out the Paganini at the end.
Well, yeah, he incorporates a riff by Paganini. I think it's from the Fifth Caprice for violin. And yeah, the devil really looks pissed off because he knows that, like, Gene's, like, paying him back in kind with that one. But, so that's clever that they incorporated a Paganini riff because he's also said to have sold his soul to the devil. But yeah, that's how he wins the duel.
Yeah, and I got to say, big chops to Steve Vai for not having a single line in the film, but being a very memorable character, and just the way his facial acting and stuff as he's doing the guitar duel and really like grimacing and all this sort of stuff. It was really fun and really gets you into the zone of like, this is high stakes,
Well, yeah, when people talk about this film, I mean, it's pretty obscure. But it has a cult following, and the cult following is mostly people who are musicians, especially guitarists. And like one of the first things they always mention is the climactic guitar duel, where Gene is up against the Devil's champion, played by Steve Vai, and they're sort of, going back and forth trading these like incredibly complex riffs to see who can basically stuff up first.
Yeah.
And well, you're a guitarist. How do you look at that scene? Is it genuinely impressive?
Yeah, I think it's a lot. It's so much fun. I've got to say, probably it's as good a time as any to mention it, that Ralph Macchio's sort of guitar miming, it's actually pretty good compared to a lot of the guitar miming you see on TV or in films, where sometimes you think, what the hell are they doing to that guitar? But he's sort of doing it pretty well, like for an actor that's just sort of doing it.
Well, I'm not a musician, and when I found out that he was actually miming to a pre-recorded track, I was a bit surprised because there are a lot of long shots where you see him moving his fingers on the guitar to the music. I mean, there's plenty of like close-ups of his fingers where you only see his fingers, and I thought, well, obviously that's probably someone else doing it. But there's enough wide shots that I was actually surprised some of this wasn't done live.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, like when he's playing something like lots of high notes, he goes up the fretboard, and then like when he's playing low notes, he goes down the fretboard, whatever, and like the slides are all kind of in time with the or whatever of the music. So yeah, I think he did very well, put it that way. And
just generally, what did you think of the way the music is presented in this film?
Well, I mean, I love the music. That's a no-brainer right there. I mean, and Ry Cooder, I mean, I've always got time for Ry Cooder's music, right from very young, as you know, growing up together. We had a couple of his albums floating around the house, and including the Crossroads soundtrack. And I mean, a lot of his incidental music he has in this film is fantastic. Like the scene when Francis leaves and Ralph, I should call him Eugene, is left...
Whatever, we know who you're talking about.
Yeah, so. The kid is sort of left there with Willie, and they're sort of commiserating over a couple of whiskeys, and he just sits down and plays the guitar, and it's such a nice little piece of music. I guess that's the one annoying thing for me as a musician. When I watched it, I was like, there's no way he's getting that tone out of that little amp and that guitar combined. But apart from that, it's very good.
Well, there's this funny moment where they're on the road and Willie Brown, critiques...
when he's got the acoustic guitar.
Well, yeah, Willie Brown critiques Gene's sort of hipster attitude to the blues and says, like, oh, I bet you bought this dumb guitar just because it looked beat up and you thought that made you so down to earth.
Muddy Waters invented electricity.
Yeah, so he convinces him to trade it in for an electric guitar with a portable amp, and Gene's not lacking in confidence. Like he says, "Oh, with this amp, I'm like a walking recording studio or something."
Funnily enough, those amps are often used for playing harmonica through for a blues. There you go.
Because the harmonica is like the Willie Brown's main instrument.
Although I think that the original Willie Brown, that was the contemporary of Robert Johnson's, was actually a guitarist as well. But...
Yeah, artistic license.
That's right.
This isn't strictly historically accurate.
Oh, really? So... and there was no 30th song, so there you go. But, yeah.
Well, there isn't in the movie.
Yeah,
that's true. That's the thing. Although, like Willie Brown was telling the truth about Satan and selling his soul to the devil and all that, he was lying about there being a 30th song that he could teach Gene. I mean, he was just stringing the kid along in that sense.
So it's 6 of one, half a dozen the other, I guess, in terms of his con madness.
Well, that's the thing. I was going to mention, like you mentioned, how like Macchio comes across as a surprisingly convincing guitarist. I was surprised to learn that he's actually 10 years older than the character he was playing.
Yeah, right.
Like he doesn't look a day over 17.
He's the baby-faced assassin, really, isn't he?
Well, yes, and he's quite short, I guess. I mean, that's probably another reason why he kept, being able to, pass himself off in juvenile roles despite being like 27 or whatever. But I think he really captures the, combination of sort of naive innocence and, brash, cocksure sort of bravado of the prodigy as well.
I guess that's the thing too. Like, he's sort of the protagonist, I guess, for want of a better term. But is there a likable character in this movie? Maybe that's why it wasn't such a big hit. Like, I mean, you've got Willie Brown, the cantankerous old man. You've got, Eugene, this like cocksure upstart. He's
just like wannabe blues man.
You've got sort of Francis as the troubled runaway, and they're like your three main characters. And then you've got like the devil and stuff.
Well, I was gonna say, and Francis who has no qualms about like mugging people or pickpocketing people to get the money for her next ride or. But here's the thing: I actually find the characters kind of endearing because of their flaws.
Yeah,
I think it makes them very human and relatable, and
they're very real people. Like like considering too like the setting.
Well, I like the odd nuances and contradictions to their character. The fact that Gene is naive when it comes to like social issues, but he is very book smart.
Yeah,
and as I said, when it comes to his music, like he struggles to pitch his performances on the right dramatic level, but he has he's got technical skills. And Willie Brown, he is a convicted murderer. He is also a guy who sold his soul to Satan for success, and his main motivation for going on this road trip is to confront Satan and saying, I feel you shortchanged me on the deal. Like, I wanted fame and success, and I only got like 15 minutes of fame. And the devil's like, I said you'd be famous. I didn't say it would last.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And I think
it's almost like making a deal with the devil is fraught with the possibility of not getting what you want. I don't know.
No, but seriously, I think that Joe Seneca plays Willie Brown, and he has the right mix of like pained, world-weary vulnerability and sort of sharp comic timing when it comes to delivering all these sarcastic quips at other people's expense.
Oh, yeah.
And
that's the thing too. Like, it's a really talky script, and I think everyone acts it very well. Like, they play their characters extremely well.
Well, and Jamie Gertz as Frances, I shouldn't mention, because like in most of the films I've seen her in, like The Lost Boys and Twisters, she's just like the glamorous sort of, object of desire for the male characters who doesn't really have much backbone or much to do. I think when we when we were doing the episode on the Lost Boys with Claire, she was saying that she wished her character had more to do. But in this film, she does get more to do, and she does actually get to show some grit and backbone. And I think she gives as good as she gets whenever she's in a scene with Willie, and Willie's delivering all these sarcastic put downs.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and the rest of the supporting cast all fill out their roles very well. I should give a shout out to Tim Russ if there's any fans of Star Trek Voyager listening to this.
Oh, was he in there?
Yeah, he was Robert Johnson in the flashback scene.
Oh, cool. Well, there you go. Yeah. Because you should say, Robert Johnson makes a cameo in the film, I guess, as with his recording or whatever.
Well, the very first scene, he goes to the Crossroads and then goes and records Crossroad Blues. How do you feel about the fact that, there's this, as I said, it's quite a laid-back, realistic road movie. Until the last 20 minutes, it's mostly, as you say, a very talky script that's all about the characters, verbal interplay, their, emotional development, and about them, I guess, learning about how the world has changed, learning about, society and the deeper nuances of their art. And then in the last 20 minutes, all of the...
Then we go to a juke joint in hell, listen to a guitar juke. Yeah, as you do. Yeah.
Look, I think there's enough foreshadowing of it that it doesn't completely come out of left field when suddenly, all of the fantasy elements that have been hinted at are confirmed at the end. Because there's all these scenes of, Willie having these eerily prophetic dreams where the devil's taunting him and such.
Yeah. And quoting Robert Johnson songs at him. Yeah.
Well, yeah, the Hellhound on My Trail, yeah.
Yeah. But, I know, it's one of those films, I kind of like this kind of fantasy film where it's quite grounded in a way, or, it's sort of contemporary fantasy, if you will, it's not sort of set in a land of elves and fairies or whatever, it's in the, quote-unquote, the real world, and then there's something fantastical happens in it, sort of, I guess, I don't know, another 80s fantasy film you'll probably get to on your podcast, Highlander would be one as well, it's downtown New York, and there's these immortals cutting each other's heads off. Whereas this is, down home Mississippi, and the devil's got this guitar duel going on every Saturday night. This is great,
Yeah, well, we've got a few requests for Highlander on the podcast, so we will get to it. You've heard the term magic realism.
Yeah, I guess that would define it, yeah.
Yeah, magic realism is when there's fantasy elements in an otherwise realistic setting, and they're not really explained, or they're kind of mysterious, but they're sort of there and casually accepted by the characters. I guess that's the other thing I should say about the way this movie is directed. It's directed in a very laid back, casual way by Walter Hill, who I know mainly for more stylized action movies like The Warriors and Streets of Fire that he did before this, but this is not like that at all. It's very low key, very sort of, I don't know, shot like a low-key, naturalistic indie film. And even when...
Yeah, well, I imagine the budget wasn't incredibly high on this.
Sure.
Yeah.
But, I mean, even when the supernatural elements came in, they're shot like they're of a piece with the rest of the film.
Yeah, like I said, there's no, puffs of smoke and fire and brimstone when they get to hell or anything. It's more just, they kind of use camera tricks to be he's behind you, kind of thing, whenever the devil shows up and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, yeah, are there any effect shots in the film, really? I don't know.
Well, I suppose there's the scene where, the devil teleports them to the club, and there's
guy goes all weird behind him.
Yeah, and the clouds are moving fast, so sped up photography. But yeah, there's no real special effects shots, and it doesn't need it.
Yeah.
I mean, the devil appears in humanoid form, and he's still, quite intimidating.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, the people playing all the sort of the devilish characters do a great job, I think.
It's very charismatic. Robert Judd and Joe Morton, I think, were the actors. Yeah, but yeah, they do a very good job of being quietly intimidating without raising their voice.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great line, I think. Yeah, when they're talking about the terms of the guitar duel or whatever, and it's if I win, I get my freedom or whatever. And Eugene's yeah, cool, whatever. And then, what if you lose or whatever? And then Willie Brown says, you got me. And then he says, I already got you. And it's just the minutes. Yeah, it's fantastic.
I remember I was talking about the central premise of this film to Claire. And she came up with this theory that it was...
Oh, yeah. Hi, Claire.
Yeah. Well, she came up with this theory that it's set in the same universe as Field of Dreams.
Okay.
And the reason she came up with it is because, like, there were various, like, conservative religious bods in the 80s who thought that the world was going to end, that they were in the end times. And there was this guy named Edgar C. Wisenant who wrote this book called 88 Reasons Why the Rapture is in 1988.
Okay.
And, of course, it didn't happen that way.
Oh, didn't it? Oh.
And, look, and Claire said, look, maybe the theory she has as to why it didn't go down that way, well, her theory was because, like, God was busy setting up baseball games in Iowa in Field of Dreams. Like, he got distracted with baseball, and the devil was too busy, like, propping up the careers of various guitarists, like Steve Vai. So that's why the end times didn't happen, because, like, God and the devil got distracted, you know.
I like it. Yeah. They got into trivial pursuits, I guess.
Well, that's the thing about, like, every movie that has, like, an interventionist God or an interventionist devil. I always think, like, they have a really weird sense of priorities as to, like, what they choose to intervene.
They're really, fiddling at the margins, really, aren't they? Yeah.
But I don't know. I think Crossroads is a very sort of amiable road movie. It's a great, like, buddy movie. And if you are into blues music, there's some, you know, there's some great moments here.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who likes a bit of Rakuda's music is going to get a kick out of it, because, I mean, he's all over the soundtrack, obviously. And, I mean, he is essentially doing, I guess, the overdubbing for Eugene through the film. So, yeah, every time he's playing the blues, it's some beautiful slide work from Rakuda. And, yeah, I don't know. I guess, is Ralph Macchio, I guess he's very good for the part, but is he too good? Is he sort of a bit too typecast, thanks to the karate movies? Is this why it didn't do very well, do you think?
I honestly think that, like, he plays the part well. His performance is dramatically nuanced. As you said, he does a good job of, you know, simulating being a guitar prodigy.
And I think, like, the emotional aspects, everything. I really love his performance.
But here's the thing. If I just explain the basic premise of this movie, which is, like, Ralph Macchio is playing a teenager who is besotted with a culture not his own and mentored by a cantankerous old man.
Like, sounds familiar.
Well, and like, someone might hear that and just think, oh, this is just going to be the Karate Kid with guitars. Been there, done that.
Yeah, well, I think the slogan for the film even was, like, the kid makes the music live on, or something like that. So it makes a distinct actual reference to the Karate Kid.
Well, yeah, it was probably a marketing thing to try and like capitalize on the success of those movies. But okay, there are some superficial similarities, but they're very different movies, like, tonally. I mean,
big time.
The Karate Kid is this triumphant escapist sports movie, basically, and like, Crossroads is a very melancholy, laid-back road movie.
Yeah,
and even though it's got some...
Yeah, and I guess that's for the most part. Yeah, it's very melancholy. It's probably a good word to describe it. Like, yeah.
I mean, there's some inspired moments of comic relief, but the comedy in Crossroads is very dry and sarcastic. So yeah, and even though it has, like, this triumphant ending with Macchio proving himself at a competition, it feels different somehow.
Oh yeah,
there's much more suspense to it, I think.
And I guess, growing up, I never really got into the Karate Kid movies, so to me, whenever Ralph Macchio gets mentioned, I do generally think, Eugene from Crossroads. I don't think, the Karate Kid.
Well, it might have helped that I saw Crossroads before I saw the Karate Kid, actually. But that's
the thing, though. I've kept going back to Crossroads again and again over the years. I saw the Karate Kid movies, and I thought, yeah, okay, they're fine. You know, I don't know. This one spoke to me more for whatever reason.
I think it is. Well, it's a much more mature movie. I think with the Karate Kid, they were aiming for, you know, family entertainment that would appeal to, like, younger kids and teenagers.
Yeah.
And with Crossroads, it's very much a movie aimed at adults.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I guess who is the target audience? Crossroads.
Well, also, I was going to say that Crossroads really delves into the debate about cultural appropriation and, you know, racial tension in America.
Yeah.
And explores the nuances of, like, all different sides of the arguments in a way that sort of, like, the Karate Kid movies also touch upon those themes, but, you know, in a much more simplistic black and white morality kind of way. And that's another. And here's the thing: I think if anyone else had been cast as Gene in this movie, other than Macchio, people wouldn't be comparing it to the Karate Kid at all.
Probably not. No. Yeah, but I guess they did, and that's why it's inevitable. You're probably going to get these comparisons, I guess.
It's its own movie, and I think perhaps something as low-key and intimate as this was never going to be a huge blockbuster anyway. It's the kind of like movie, I guess, that's sort of made for watching on video. I remember like watching it a few days ago, rewatching it, and one of the things that was good about watching it at home was I was able to pause the tape or pause the discs. I was able to pause the DVD at the moment where Willie is signing the contract with the devil, and actually look at the words on the contract and see that like it's actually like written in all this like really complex legalese.
Like I, Willie Brown, the aforesign.
It's quite funny. If you're watching the movie again, like pause it at that moment and try and read the contract. It's quite a funny read. But yeah, I mean,
I guess the devil's got plenty of lawyers.
I think like people mention Macchio, but like as I said, I've seen Joe Seneca and Jamie Gertz in character parts in other things, and liked them in those parts. Like I liked Joe Seneca in Mississippi Masala. I liked Jamie Gertz in The Lost Boys. But it's nice to see them be given a role that's more of a leading role, that gives them more meat to chew on as actors.
Like I said, well, who is the lead role really? I mean, it's a bit of a toss-up, isn't it? Like they both get a lot of screen time and a lot of emotion to emote. I mean, yeah, between Willie and Eugene, they're both, I guess, the main character, really.
Well, it's a buddy movie, so I guess it's split between the two of them, and I think they both get a equal amount of character development and an equal amount of emotional depth. I would not call this film like a white savior movie. I would not call it a movie where like Willie Brown is the magical Negro of inspiration for Eugene. Yeah. Like they both have enough complexity that even though like you might see like the setup for that, like a lesser movie might have set up the relationship, the emotional dynamic in that way, but this movie doesn't. It's much more complex than that.
Well, there's a lot of older scenes basically where Ralph Macchio says like, "Hey Willie, how about this riff?" Whatever. And oh, that's shit. Yeah, it's like he's definitely not sort of blowing any sunshine up Eugene's ass.
But here's the thing: when he does, have some words of praise for the character, I guess that makes it really counts.
Yeah. I mean, it's all kind of summed up really. He gets this great little monologue there just after Francis has left and Eugene's playing his heart out or whatever. And, Joe Seneca gets to basically stare down the barrel of the camera and say, like, all these years, all these gigs, whatever. I just wanted someone to say, he was good. He could really play, And I think that is, I guess, almost like the message of the film, really. Like, fame and glory at the expense of your souls, it's one thing, but to just genuinely be able to play music and express yourself. It's the goal, I guess, we all have.
And I think it sort of touches upon, I don't know, the effort, the sacrifice, the commitment it takes to be a professional artist, let alone a great professional artist. Just to sort of get by and motivate yourself to, go through the grind of it all. Yeah. I think it's very like mature and very relatable in that sense. To like any artist could probably relate to some of their struggles of the characters in this.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's presented in a very sort of fantastical sense, and it's got the devil and stuff in it. But I mean, in terms of films about music, it's I would say it's more realistic than some. But I mean, none of them are particularly realistic. I mean, it's because, I mean, a lot of a working musician, the life of a working musician is a bit of a grind, really. It's just like, going out looking for gigs and hustling for money and all this sort of stuff. It wouldn't make a very fun film. But, I mean, the way it's presented here is pretty good. It's more realistic than some, like I say, and less than others, I suppose.
Well, that's what I was saying to Claire in the episode we did on Gothic, which was a sort of very stylized, fantastical depiction of the lives of like Mary Shelley and Lord Byron and such, and how it sort of strived to depict their lives in a fantastical way that was more like the fiction they wrote. Because in real life, I think they probably spent a lot more time just sitting at a desk writing.
Yeah.
And that's not very interesting it'd be less interesting than the kind of phantasmagorical thing that they came up with.
And same with like a film about a classical musician is probably just going to be them sitting around playing the same piece over and over again for hours. Like, wow, exciting stuff, right? Or, yeah, like you say, a film about a writer is just them sitting down, tapping away at the typewriter for the whole film. Wow. Thrilling stuff, I guess.
Well, yeah. And I think maybe that's why, like, you notice all this mystique surrounding Robert Johnson is less about his music than about him as a person and his supposed, like, dark adventures. And
Yeah. And it's not just like, he must have gone away and practiced. It's like...
Yeah, he must have sold his soul.
It's way cooler if he did something like that.
Well, yeah, it's not just like he cut himself off from his friends because he didn't like them or just because he really wanted to focus on practicing. He just practiced nonstop.
Don't have time to party.
Yeah.
I better go woodshed. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that Crossroads is a film that touches upon many tropes that are common in 80s films. Like there's the, black guy, white guy, buddy movie dynamic. There's the sort of, I don't know, hero's journey of like the young maverick being mentored by a like seasoned veteran, and there's the whole sort of, I guess, road movie structure as well.
Yep.
But
it hits all those cliche points,
I guess, but I think it does all those things with a lot more nuance and complexity than you might expect. And with regards to the way it blends this sort of very down-to-earth social commentary with these fantastical fantasy elements, I think it blends seamlessly. It all seems to be just of one piece.
Yeah.
And I mean, it demands a certain amount of patience from the viewer because, as you said, most of it's just like people walking down a road talking to each other. And, but the things that they're saying to each other are interesting.
Yeah.
And in between that, you get some like, kick-ass, blues music numbers.
Yeah.
Right.
And I guess like a good blues number, really, isn't it? It's a lot of cliches all hung together, but boy, do they do them well.
Yeah.
That's all for this week, folks. Thanks for listening. If you like what we're doing, please consider subscribing and sharing this podcast with your friends. If you have any questions or would like to provide suggestions for future episodes, you can send an email to fantasypodcastfeedback@gmail.com. Until next time, cheers.